We're here for a different kind of video again, and this time, I'm a few weeks out and medicated and rested, and actually today was an interesting day. I dropped my best friend off at the airport. He just moved to Boston, so the San Francisco area is a little weaker for me in terms of support than it used to be. And then ran 13.1 miles, and then decided I should still make this slide deck and still make this presentation. I think a lot of you have been asking, what do I mean I had a breakdown? And it wasn't just kind of a single loss of emotion or anything else. It was being put into hospitalization for direct observation for 72 hours because of an event I did in the morning of March 17th. But honestly, there's a lot going on the week of the 13th forward that's worth consideration. So I want to try to tell my story that this is on April Fool's Day. You can just believe this has been a big charade. I've definitely had some interesting releases on April Fool's Day that are like that, but Gmail was also released on April Fool's Day, and I think that wasn't a sort of joke. So, here is a picture of me from January, the last time I took a day. Well, it wasn't really a day off. I flew on a Friday night to get to Dallas to see a Van Gogh olive tree exhibition. But with all my hair, with the Buffalo Sabres mask, with sort of the painting on my back wall in front, like this was not where I was at in February, and certainly by March I was having some struggles. And let's start at the end, I guess. If Thomas overthinks everything is how I go through my life on my best days, what does it mean when I have some of my worst days? This is some of the evidence of one of my worst days. This is an admission form for an involuntary patient advisement. It's the 5150, I think, is the California term. A set of police officers assigned that I was being dangerous to myself. As you can see in the middle here, it was reported you were running around El Camino Real naked. You also told the officers that you wanted to hurt yourself. Now, the second thing I have no memories of, and I never have wanted to hurt myself. I may have been saying, like, I didn't need the blanket, but please make the handcuffs stop hurting. But I was indeed put into hospitalization with no clothes on, no possessions near me, fully naked, running around El Camino Real near Burlingame. Is actually on a street off of El Camino Real, and we'll get to that later. But starting at the end, that's pretty serious. And for the last few weeks, I have been taking some of the medications here, olanzapine, a 10 milligram dose, just sort of an antipsychotic to at least try to slow the racing of thoughts. Not that my thoughts are racing too fast or in a dangerous way, but at some stage, having gone off a very extreme manic event, any amount of control to get back to normal, and then to see that it's not that it degrades into a depressed moment, but back to a kind of normal, healthy moment is key. And so I will be continuing those medications through the rest of this month. I'm starting outpatient counseling next week, and 3 days a week we'll be going to that service, having a psychiatrist observe me as well, and see sort of what comes of this. But I don't know sort of what got to the extreme, but, for me to say, is this real? Like, when I even look at the document on the left, 1:23 a.m. of all the dates and times, like 1:23 a.m. There are parts of this that don't actually make sense, but that's because I can see any different kinds of things and make lots of connections. 23, in an unusual way, is a really important number for me. It's not that it's like some magic prime, it is prime. I mean, it's those sort of things. It was a case when we were doing puzzle construction with the League of Extraordinary Puzzlemen that we had a complete loss of chronicity. That's not the word, sorry, like the order of things, because there was a group that wanted to have Bang 24 themed around the Fox TV show of Jack Bauer 24, but we weren't ready to run yet. And so we were sort of grandfathered into having to run Bang 23. And we eventually ran it on the 1.23 year anniversary of a date that was credibly between Bang 22 and Bang 24. So Bang 23 is one of my most proud puzzle events, made with three co-constructors. 23 for different reasons. And, when I grew up, Don Mattingly and other athletes were also number 23. Like, my brother really loved Don Mattingly with the New York Yankees at baseball. But Michael Jordan was 23. Michael Jordan is MJ. And if you ever wonder why I get inspired by some of Sircon Euclid's puzzles at times, like he uses the 2-3 theme to get to MJ. And MJ are my mother's initials, Marcia Joy. She passed away a few years ago from cancer, and we'll sort of talk through some of that through this story. Marshall is my middle name. I don't share my middle name, but my mom's name is phonetically within my middle name, and she's always been the center of my life in different ways. It took her death for me to understand how much my dad was also in the center of my life, that he was sort of financially supporting the family. When I was a child, I think I had more like estrangement issues from dad because I learned how to like play baseball from my mom, and all the gardening, all the cooking, everything was done by my mom. I saw my dad as an absentee father, and that was really an unfair assessment, and it took me till my 30s and 40s when we were coping with mom's illness and eventually her passing to reconnect that. So anyway, 1:23 a.m. is not a great time for me to kind of be 100% certain I actually was hospitalized and this isn't just a game, but I'm 99.9999% certain I was hospitalized and this isn't a game. I had a serious thing. Second question is why the buzz cut? So during parts of the week we'll describe in detail, I probably had a mix of either paranoia or a little bit of psychosis. At least it felt important to change my appearance a bit so that I was going to cut the hair or dye the hair. Some aspect was that. But the specific reasons actually really, it's a bit emotionally challenging to say because it even like one of the flashbulb moments in my life as a kid was not, I guess not as kids, I was becoming an adult, was after the first year of graduate school, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, and we didn't have any sense of how long she would sort of still be around. We were hoping that she'd see my brother's wedding, see me get a PhD, see all these things happen. We were blessed to have 14 years of life together, but even from that first day, she was absolutely terrified of getting chemotherapy. She didn't want to lose her hair. She wanted people to know she had cancer. She wouldn't let us tell others. I told some friends because I'm not an awesome person. I need support too. I told some friends, but like generally it wasn't a thing we talked about because a woman without her hair can be judged quite differently. And I'm sorry that in this week, after a really weird Oscars ceremony, you're gonna have a different reason to think that there's a metaphorical slap in your face about these sort of things. But like having disease and being recognized as different because of disease is a challenge we all face in different modes, whether for mental health or physical health or other reasons. There are conscious purposes that people don't reveal an autoimmune disease diagnosis or don't react well to jokes about things. Like, yes, our hair and unusual skin or unusual wounds or other things are public signs of our lives, but be empathetic and not just like reactive when you see an example of a bald woman. And in this case, cutting off my hair, something my mom was never comfortable doing. It was only sort of there in her last month of life because she was actually through estrogen type therapies, spared from chemotherapy until the very end. Like losing hair mattered to her. And so to have like a shaved head, I didn't sort of fully shave it down. It was like pretty short though, was some sign of doing something my mother was never comfortable with, that maybe for the next few years of my life, I'll just kind of keep this short like this. Because again, the conversation of disease and health and uh, alopecia and anything else, like it's a mess. And you can understand the patient's reason to sort of keep stuff private and why, even with mental health, I've never seen anyone else sort of talk about at any level of depth, let alone this crazy. This will be a crazy level of depth because I overthink everything. I care that memory is fallible, but source evidence, source documents are not. So I'm going to be like reading you emails and reading you documents I wrote on the days I wrote them because that's a useful way to know what happened and not your other sort of attempts of, well, I sort of remember this thing happening in this way. Anyway, I didn't describe like a casual Friday for me at work is sometimes wearing this tie. This is a Verily themed tie. So if you're wondering why I look so formal on April Fool's Day, sometimes when I have my greatest successes, I like dressing up for them. I last wore this as a costume called Dressed Up for Halloween, which was a Verily Halloween event 2 years ago. So anyway, this was the tie we made for our computational biology team. At that time, all men. You know, I hired a set of sort of women and other diverse people into the team, but we had 6 guys in ties at a James Bond Christmas event in 2017, and this tie brings me back to a happy time like that time. So anyway, um, so we talked about connections, talked about the buzz cut. Like before we get into the specifics of this week, I want to bring up 2 specific concepts. One is just I tend to use these 2 terms, but I'm not sure they're as precisely defined in the psychiatric sphere, but I think they're helpful to understand. Mania is a dangerous thing, but mania, which most of you will understand, or the term manic, which comes from the same root. Like it's an abnormal, elated mental state. It's often the parallel track of depression. You will hear of manic depression or bipolar disorder, where people have times of really abnormal, elated states. They may be super happy, they may be super excited, they may be talking super fast. Their thoughts will be racing so much if they even speak at the rate of their thoughts, they'll lose you, right? They may actually just biochemically have a diminished need for sleep. These people could not be sleeping for days on end. I've at different moments have some of these same things. The lack of inhibitions is worrying, but in particular, when this gets to either psychoses, so seeing the world in ways that aren't real, or having other reasons to be causing harm to self or others is where most often manic episodes, particularly episodes that last for multiple days, have a need for hospitalization. Hypomania isn't exactly that. It's milder. And because it's milder, it may actually be a performative or useful part of brain function. Like some part of fight or flight can even be, in my past history, some form of hypomania. Like my mystery hunt team in 2009 will remember when we started to have these things sort of go bad. Like Thomas just started to speak up and step up, and like for 3 days I didn't sleep, but I did kind of make the thing work out, and I did have an abnormal elated mental state. I was making connections on the side that maybe we didn't need to be talking about during the mystery hunt, sort of getting fixed and run, but at some stage I didn't need to sleep. I had racing thoughts, but they were conscious and connected thoughts. They made sense. They were important to hear. The team could react to them and go on them. I did have force of speech like today. Like I talk fast, and in my hypomanic modes I talk even faster. But as long as they're short, or as long as they're controlled, they by their definition, at least as I've seen it, and again, like see the warning in the upper right, this isn't official guidance. I'm not a doctor. Well, I'm a I'm a PhD in chemistry, but I'm not a medical doctor on this to sort of say how to think about this. But hypomania could be a healthy mode to be in. I don't know if Da Vinci was at hypomanic for most of his life, but where he'd be described as taking like 1 hour naps at best. Like to me, he's describing traits that I've seen in myself at times. I'm not saying I'm like Da Vinci in sort of the brilliance in his culture, but I'm saying parts of my brain chemistry are similar to other describe people in history. So hypomania versus mania, like my question's always been, well, I know when I become manic, when the thing that most critically changes is do I start to lose touch with reality? Because that's when risk to others or risk to self become real, that sense of psychosis. And that's where, like, one thing through my life, and I've never really been as open about this with other people during my life, is I have a set of ways I watch myself, and they've even gotten better with technologies. Like now that we have wearable technologies, like to some extent, Fitbit can know my good days and my bad days, not like grossly, like it's not a simple thing, but when you zoom way out, one of the things, there are two obvious signs for me about when I'm in a hypomanic mode. One is my head certainly feels quite different. The way I describe this, and this will be probably true if you've read the Wheel of Time books. I have no idea. I've not seen the Amazon Prime series if this is described in the where people have seen this. Matt Cawthon is a character who's described as having dice tumbling in his head. And this is almost like he's feeling danger around, but because the dice are sort of rolling and rolling and rolling, at some moments he'll know, oh, I got to dodge this way, and I got to dodge back that way, and other stuff. And so he's kind of playing through scenarios, but then there's a moment when it stops and it ends. Like one thing about my hypomanic mode, I know when they're done, and it's the same sense of the dice have stopped, right? There's the bloody dice or something like that is how it's described. The bloody dice have stopped is how Matt will describe it. So I'm saying like the danger's gone, right? The situation's gone, and I guess for those who aren't in the hashtag Wheel of Time universe, the hashtag Marvel universe could get the same from thinking about the multiverse. There's a lot of potential in front of me. Like one of the things a hypomanic fight or flight kind of thing will be about is like there's a lot more uncertainty and ambiguity around me than there was just before. And it's important that I start to solve for where do I want to control for things, improve things, watch out for things, or where am I willing to let some balls drop. But like I'm playing out scenarios in my head. I'm getting into I'm sometimes like rehearsing conversations. I'm about to talk to my CEO for the first time in a year. What might he be asking me about? What should I be ready to say in that? What should I ask him about? What is my like one sentence or one paragraph form of a request? And so playing out those scenarios is my form of the dice rolling in my head. So I very much know when my brain is different because it feels different. But another thing is you can just watch like my Fitbit. Like I'm a kinetic thinker, so I'm walking or running far more than usual. Here's an example of the longest hypomanic mode I've ever had in my life. It was a 6-month period, but it was a period that ended with me taking on a job at Adaptive Biotechnologies, which started around the summer of 2019. And so this is it's sort of, you can see that June has a start of an inflection point, and then July and August and September, and eventually what we ended up calling Walktober. And one of the things that helps me in these moments is to get positive attribution and positive energies around things. So I actually turned this, where Google always had a how much can people walk during October kind of contest, I actually turned this into a fundraising effort for Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, and we raised several, I think like about $20,000, 5,000 my own, but doubled and then doubled again through other people donating through it. But this was me very much in a mode of like, do I want to have the job I'm in at Verily? It was triggered by two events that happened within an hour on June 25th. One was Adaptive's IPO. Adaptive is a former employer and a place I knew that eventually, if I'd kept applying my time, we could do really impressive things for immune medicine. And the second was an accidental recruiter email from Freenome, which is a cell-free DNA company, another place I have really great prior experience. And they weren't meant to kind of be sending emails to Verily folks, and it took me 4 to 5 more months to finally get the right kind of position to potentially consider at a place like Freenome. But those two things happened with an hour of myself during the course of me taking a Google bus down to Mountain View, so I very much know those came together. I will misremember that a third event happened that day, and that's something that actually happened on June 1st when I reviewed my email, of a dear friend's father getting a lung cancer diagnosis. And I hadn't processed that yet, but one thing about memory is fallible in time because your brain will imprint when it's thinking through the event, separate from when the event happened. But to me, this was like three things: a friend's father with cancer. I haven't myself connected back to feel I'm doing meaningful work at Verily for cancer autoimmune disease yet. We had a lot of supportive programs. Like, where could I go to finally deliver the potential I saw in myself? And so some form of a company that I left that was being successful, being recognized by the financial markets, company that was just one door down from us that was trying to get a lot of benefit even from like having lunches with me and hearing about when I was in the cell-free transplantation space, cell-free DNA transplantation space, just how to do this. Like, anyway, this confluence of jobs and a friend with cancer was that June blip that became an ongoing thing for 6 months of just a lot more walking. And so who watches The Watchmen? Like, I watch The Watchmen if I'm there. Like, maybe I'm the Ozymandias character, but at some stage, like, I knew this was going on. Like, I lost 25 to 30 pounds during this. Like, others knew this was going on too, and in different ways, at least, like, were encouraging. No one sort of asked, like, how is your mental health? One thing I won't put in here, but like, I sometimes will take what's called the PHQ-9 test. It's a public health questionnaire or patient health questionnaire about sort of your attitudes, and where you're either like eating more than you would regularly or eating less than you would regularly, other things. And I have to adapt the test because I don't have suicidal ideation, so I don't use the last question the way it's described. I'll like change question 9 to be like, have you thought about like giving up your identity slash, changing or leaving your job or anything else? Like, will you do career suicide? Is, I guess it's a little trite, but at least for me, it lets me get to a 0 to 27 axis, and my like low range in history is probably an 11 or 12. That would be depressed in any standard, and my high in some of these moments was as high as 27. Like, by October, November here, like, I was 27 for ongoing weeks. I was definitely in really, really stressed mental health. I was still, though, keeping myself sane and getting jobs done and like writing concise and organized emails. And I probably did just need to take a month off. And no one just said, take a month off. My manager actually encouraged that, but he says, like, either get to the answer you need or take time away. And he gave all the right advice and I ignored all of it. So anyway, like, well, today's video is mostly about this week, March 13th through March 19th, or actually the first 5 days of this week. Later on, I may talk about what it's like to be in a mental health wing, adult mental health ward of a hospital, and the kinds of people you meet and the structures of those days, and a lot of curious stories. They're important stories. It actually was eye-opening to see a range of mental health, mental illness I really had never directly seen in that way, and also to feel as helpless as you can when you're committed and don't know if you're ever getting out again. Like, some reason to not speak about mental health is, for many of us, our agency as individuals is the thing we prize most in our life. And opening up in this way, when you have a suspect brain, or like, sort of maybe like nation states are going to like sort of do things to you, like cities can decide you're a harm to yourself and take away your right to kind of be in your house. Like, that's the challenge of this week. But I'm going to go from 13 through 17 and kind of split it up into half days and just talk about what I was doing during a very sort of agitated life. And your challenge as an audience is to ask yourself, at what times, on which days do I seem out of control? Both in the kinds of actions I'm taking, the kinds of things I'm doing. There's no right or wrong answer here. And one of the things I'm going to read out some documents I wrote during these times, like, the documents may seem manic, but they also will probably seem pretty composed and visionary and motivating and other things. Like, being an effective leader is sometimes speaking beyond reason, and sometimes being an effective leader is only talking to data and details and reality. And to understand the difference in both is something I have to walk across every day as a manager of a team of 30 plus, with a partner in Microsoft of 20 more, to 10, 15 more. I never can get an exact number there. So like, just ask yourself, because like, I'm asking myself, like, at what moment, except maybe the very last moment, had I crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed? I don't know. So we'll start on Sunday of this week. And I guess before getting to Sunday this week, we should give a little bit of the kind of highlights of January and February into this week. And so, again, I was 2 years into adaptive. I have crossed off a lot of the things I wanted to do at adaptive, including launching to detect COVID. I launched a test with the whole team around it, with learnings from regulatory, quality, product development, other groups to say, can I take a diagnostic from first experiment all the way to something that's now used in patients? And the pandemic accelerated the timelines of doing those steps. I felt it would take 5 years to do. I did that in the first year with a massive team of support around me. So the sense of I should always be we. Like every place I just said I, please change to be we. So I was already entering the year thinking this is probably my last year, at least in the same form of role, to be a 60-hour-a-week kind of employee at Adaptive, sort of leading the team of the size I can. I'd love to keep on as an advisor, but at some stage, one of my dreams is to go back to being a founder of a startup company and taking it from a small team to a very large team. 2 to 200 is some short form of that story. So I knew I wanted, when we got through performance review season, to at least start that kind of conversation with my manager about sort of where I was at and what I was trying to prepare for, and get the team to a good transition mode. I was already getting the team to a good transition mode. We'd hired some good people in. But in the very start of March, it was clear that adaptive, in part because like the financial market's really bad for biotechs in general right now. Adaptive was trying to make some decisions, both on budget and eventually on workforce, to give us additional time. And so the week prior to this was a week that the team had a reduction in workforce called a RIF. I never knew that acronym, the TLA, before the week of the March 6th. But we were going through a RIF, and while I knew a little in advance and sort of defined for my team the people who'd be affected by it, the roles specifically, not the people, but once you know the roles that are to be reduced, then the people go along exactly in those roles. The team as a whole didn't know this was coming. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of the prior week were some form of crisis management for team members who were not even knowing how to think or feel about it. And admittedly, I was encouraging those who had the most prior experience with RIFs, including some on the team that had been in the biotech space, to reach out to the 2 impacted team members, Melissa and Taylor, who are no longer with the team. But my job at the start was to get a good composed group through the week, comfortable at least, to know what kinds of questions to ask and where to be waiting for signals from leadership, how to kind of like repeat the messages they need to be hearing, to understand that maybe this is a question about trust that they're working through, but who is the issue of trust? What kind of trust issue is it? Is it about benevolence? Is it about competency? Is it about reliability or honesty? I don't have those emails in this thing, but like I think I did a pretty good job through the week of leading the team through that. But my own conversations outside of my team were with a lot of people who themselves were thinking about, should I still be adaptive? I've got these job offers. Should I take them? I mean, there's a lot of negative sentiment around me the prior week, and I was just waiting for the weekend to just decompress a bit, and had some interesting conversations on Saturday. Felt a little bit composed. I did get 3.5 hours of sleep, which is pretty large for this time. Like in normal life, I'd have much more, but again, I was probably in a hypomanic state since, I guess, the Omicron variant. The Omicron variant was a little bit of a nudge, and then a little bit through January and February was growing. I was at maybe 250,000 steps per week, which is moderate, but in March, getting to like 300,000 steps per week, which was starting to be at peak October. So anyway, now I think we're finally at March 13th in the morning. I was just figuring out like what was mattering to me, and a lot of stuff that was mattering to me is actually outside of work, right? Ukraine was bothersome. I'd just finished reading a few weeks prior, like Termination Shock by Neil Stephenson, but that's a pretty, sort of interesting vision, at least for the sovereign individuals, of how we might approach climate change when nation states aren't going to be doing much to sort of help there, but engineering, whether good ideas or bad ideas, but just shooting sulfur dioxide in the air at some stage is a solution there. Like a lot of things in my mind, and some things not all about work. It's important to understand that. But one thing I hadn't done was actually myself reached out to Melissa and Taylor, the 2 people I had told on Tuesday morning that they no longer had a role at Adaptive, and was giving them some space but wanted to reach out to them. And I hadn't planned for the fact that they hadn't already LinkedIn joined to me or vice versa, right? And I didn't plan for the fact that the software systems at Adaptive, like a lot of IT software, are really, 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 really bad for searching for info. So I felt it would be an easy task to just find the emails if I didn't have them close. And I think I had Melissa's from an interview process, but I didn't have Taylor's. But like as a puzzle solver, as someone who accepts constraints all the time, I wanted to hold myself to a standard of not like pinging anyone on my team to just say, can you just give me the email? I told most of the team just to be offline, disconnect. Like it's not fair if I tell them to disconnect to pull them back in for a second. Now you'll say it's a little kind of crazy thing, but this is sort of how I deal with constraints. So eventually, after 8 hours of not really 8 hours, I mean, one of the things about these times on the right, I built this calendar before I checked the details, and so I think I'm off by an hour or two. I think this message actually was sent around 12:30. But let me sort of go to the first email through this week. Something I sent midday Sunday to the AngMap team. Subject, help with 2 email addresses, and then your network to do good. This is not my normal form of email, but in some of my more motivational modes, you'll see things like this. I guess I'm not trying to like contextualize this. I'm just going to read and sort of scroll through this. TLDR team, an anonymous person you may know needs 2 things shared to help them out. First, send us Melissa and Taylor's email addresses so your leader has them for the next time they need them. Second, maybe not just from you or your fellow adapters, but from people you know who get joy from anonymously giving joy to someone right now. At least $100,000 to match the $100,000 one anonymous person who doesn't see anything better to do with their cash right now wants to share back in a gracious way. The bold stuff above is a start, but maybe alongside that, some help and eyes from those in your network who can make this into forms that bring real change alongside the 2 emails. Like people curious about T cells from adaptive biotech and Dr. Sudoku. Well, their team really, but a conductor often starts with the credit until they get the chance to properly share the credit and name all of the orchestra of the united are actually the voice speaking. Let's get some more people's thoughts around better vaccines that are based on T cell signals, not just antibodies, an old technique where we need new ideas to partner for a joined foundation. Please help us be ahead of COVID's mutations and also other diseases. Changing autoimmune disease to precision immunotherapy will probably need time, but it starts with innovation. So let's solve for people thinking big again. And maybe for a very small set of the audience, one tiny thing your leader might want if they don't get to it first. Some good trained folks who can help not make mistakes in legal accounting from that anonymous person's taxes due in a month, if they remember, because that isn't easily just done by being intuitive. Society stopped 3 letters too short? Help this tired anonymous soul to set up a large GoFundMe page when they don't have the energy to, with the understanding that $100,000 from that anonymous person is being donated as a match up to that amount from anyone else, a total of $200K for now, but they have more. Dollars for hashtag Melissa and Taylor. And maybe if it gets a little bigger than that, dollars for any other adapter affected who needs bridging funds until they find their next awesome job, not just the next job. They might even want to come back to work here, but that is their choice. It always should be. If more after that does come in, if network effects are real as a good result of social media, despite all the evil it is causing to destroy us, why not stuff to help Ukraine that everyone who is feeling hopeless and helpless is asking to send but cannot? How much would what Ukraine needs cost if it could be bought by non-governments, by sovereign individuals, or anything else, to push back insane tyrants with undeserved power? Or in the spirit of love, not hate, maybe just the idea to give a hashtag penny for everyone on this planet. They'll not be worth much to change some of our lives. Certainly not the anonymous donor, but $100,000 doesn't either for them. That's a hard perspective to take on one's own. To be hungry when you lost sight of the penny before you were born. Maybe the idea of penny for everyone will actually change the world. Logistically, it might lead to incredible innovation because it probably costs more to hand out than $100 million with current technology. We already spend more to make the penny than a penny is worth. At least I think so without updating prior research into this. Waste is easy. Innovation is hard. At this point, that was the end of my message to my team. The next was a message to Melissa and Taylor. Again, it's some manic, I don't mean to give too much interpretation. It's some mode of putting this out there. I felt this would just get out to the world. And actually, my team never got this out to the world. So this video is a weird way of a different multiverse of the story where this was my big push and I just disconnected for a week and nothing else needed to happen. Anyway, to Melissa and Taylor, when you see this, you might know who it is from. This is still a first draft of the words your leader really wanted to say to apologize yesterday. Their advice right now is what any sane friend would be telling you at this time. Don't rush into a worse place. Don't even think about the resume for a bit. You have your other family members at Adaptive watching out for you. Rest for now. And have some fun today. Thomas needs some time still to think through the real apology that you deserve. An apology won't erase Tuesday, the day they were riffed, or Wednesday, or a lot of life recently. You deserve more. But to solve for you, a lot more needed fixing because of the fact that your email addresses are a little hard to find right now. And most importantly, if you haven't learned it yet, you mostly learn from the times you were challenged. This surprised you. It surprised me. Please wake up. Don't work for a boss. Work for a leader. Better yet, just be a leader. You'll get $100,000 and a penny eventually as seed funds. You ultimately won't need either of these things. You can rebuild from harder experiences than this. It just sucks right now. You can't remember any hope or love. You've got company. And then there's a section I write, and I write it sort of in a trite way, but knowing the audience is both myself and my team, I call this out as a thing I'm most writing for myself, but I want the team to see it and hear it and think it and even come back to it. Because like this is the message to the world. It's just the message that like I need to start with. Because I didn't want to, this isn't about 2 emails. This is in general for me about feeling trapped in a job that has such potential in front of it, but where like the ways we kind of debate ideas, like we need an innovation shot in the arm. Like certainly things that I think we could be doing better. And so dear future Thomas, not at all concise, but hopefully cogent for your records when it shouldn't be expected from any single one of us right now to have the mental health to think through a simple task like 2 emails on a Saturday now turned to Sunday. So dear future Thomas, you know that you never mean for your team to have to think about work on the weekend. Except when times called for big innovation, like in 2020, when your team somehow worked however they needed to do great work because a pandemic called for it. Continue to send inspirational emails so your team is always willing to be plugged in, to be pleasantly surprised when they choose to be. As you said before, quality times quantity is what matters, and you don't watch anyone on your team's hours. You just trust them to give their all, however they figure out to do meaningful work. Yes, you can sometimes get too into the details. But if some unknown friction is requiring you to put all of this effort into 2 emails, you've forgotten your creative past. You know about superconductivity. Make that into an adjective for how we will think. Take this as an obvious lesson to not listen to your doubts given your mental health right now. You are smart enough to use good software and search for info like 2 email addresses. It is a business IT software you're asked to use, always different at every place. That is never, ever smart. Yes, you do hold people and products and countries and humanity even to a ridiculously high standard. That sounds audacious, but please be audacious. It's fair because you still are holding yourself to something so much higher than that somehow, that no one else can understand yet. And some will soon, more eventually. Trust. You didn't send a text on a weekend that would bother any single team members you told to unplug because you were a good leader. So just go unplug, but that is the only thing all of them want for you if they knew to reach you. Please consider that the next time you plug in, after the world solves for Melissa and Taylor and whoever else you do want to help, no one will remember 2 emails, which is embarrassing. But it starts by opening eyes. That's the first meme. Most memes are useless, symptoms of the disease, but some are the first signals that identify routes to a cure. You are starting to see ways to transform something in society. You just don't know what. Healthcare, discussions on mental health, decency. After the 2 emails, you'll want them to remember you for anything else. You have a lot more to share. Your starting idea is the 2 whiteboard erasers. That is amazingly still just your story, at least as far as you have seen. Figure out while offline how to tell that story before your network invariably spoils the secret. It may take till you are 50 years old, but eventually you'll run into a single other person using your idea or just inventing it again. It's not valuable to patent 2 erasers. It's obvious. Not like your other patents. Most people in a job that requires them to usually spend a minute erasing a whiteboard after meetings to protect company IP spends the full minute because they think the task is meaningful. They're awed to be in a room with powerful, rich people. You never cared how much money was being made in the room with you in that minute. You cared about 30 seconds of your time. So you stocked all the meeting rooms with a second eraser because you have 2 hands and 2x before you even start applying your mind. It's not that hard. anyone who has two hands, which isn't everyone out there, could do that. The one-handed person finds other ways to do more of their time because they think harder. So stay hungry. Keep one hand behind your back. Heck, you can keep both behind your back because you already know your voice is what needs to be heard to scale the impact. At some form, the story stops there because, like, at least for what at Adaptive was bothering me, like, and that's not a good email to necessarily send on a Sunday, but like, for me to know that I was now like asking for time away, a little bit of a disconnect gap, um, sort of start a walk and think. I was at least in an okay mode, but after that email, like, I guess I really did hope for something like the GoFundMe to actually be there, and like my team members who aren't really on social media, or at least like there's not the smart people are not as plugged in to use. I actually did go and set one up, and I linked to it from my LinkedIn and my Facebook, and I started to walk, and this was the first time like if there were self triggers or like the right kind of like pause moments. There were, unfortunately I was not removed enough from other stimulation. The first very dangerous sign was, in my mind, the rest of of that. Not the message, not saying the GoFundMe. I start to walk around 4 o'clock. And you'll see from Fitbit data, I don't stop until just about midnight. That is 50,000 steps. That's 7-ish hours of walking. And I somehow, if the GPS data were here, I didn't actually have the GPS on. I was using a path in Mercer Island, and I don't know Mercer Island as well as I know a lot of my places back home. But like at some stage I was in the southeast parts of it, none of the street names in Seattle, Washington area, which are like number something northeast or west something number, like, and I eventually pulled out a map and figured out how to get, so on the phone, figure out how to get back. But like those 7 hours were just processing lots of different thoughts. Like, if this is going to be a GoFundMe and if it was going to take off, like Melissa and Taylor weren't the only two people that I was very concerned about through the reduction in workforce. They were just the most directly impacted in my management chain. There are other friends, those one who honestly I think has long COVID, and I've been thinking through in different ways. Someone who was recently going to be moving close to Buffalo, New York, which is where my dad lives right now. Like, I have both a good network, but I also have a lot of people I care for. I'm an empathic person. And so some of the first 3 or 4 hours of the 7 hours was working through a lot of those ideas in different ways. And the rest was then really understanding like communication, other goals. But again, like this Fitbit evidence at the bottom is pretty clear something's off. And Fitbit values its privacy or values my privacy. Thank you, Google. Thank you, Fitbit. But like, there's no auto alert of not okay, Thomas. But like, I have this data. I'm also living through that walk and living through the rain starting around 9 o'clock or whenever it was and getting cold and all this stuff. And I didn't want to turn my phone back on because it was like, missed message from my CEO, missed message from my CS. So like everyone is just like reaching out because like obviously like it was a tough time. And one thing after I have long thought sessions, and now we're into Monday morning, and to get thoughts out of my head, I have to put them somewhere. And you'll recognize this even from like the very long email I wrote to you for the team. Like, that was me putting a whole set of thoughts in a document. I sometimes do choose to send those documents because it's fun slash it's sort of pushes you and pushes your team to understand you better. Like, if you just do your, some form of write it down and never send it, it's not always good. Although if you're going to be sending things at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, like, please wait on those. I think there are some good life lessons about when you send like unusual forms, lengths, or any other part of communication. But I had to write some stuff out. And so I did take about 6 hours. I didn't have any time to really sleep. I think maybe between 1 and 3 a.m. I might have had some sleep. I didn't have my Fitbit on, so I can't recall if I actually just like had a quick zonk out. But there was no like long dedicated sleep here. A lot of this was just putting some thoughts down for the campaign, for like what the next few days would be, but then like stepping back from that about communication and humanity 2.0 and other ideas that eventually from 6 to 9 a.m. I just decided, well, I've never done this form of it before. Instead of writing out, let's just talk. I was making some slides. Let's just like speak to them. And I think a lot of you in the tone of voice would say I was probably crazy in the video, and that's just me, like, where I had lots of, I think in individual minutes, I haven't rewatched the video. I've had some people talk to me about it, including close friends who are familiar with my rate of speech and other ideas and things, saying like the individual sections were pretty well composed. The jumps between sections were kind of like superhuman or non-human in terms of what the audience couldn't follow them. But for sure, like the dice were tumbling in my head for all those 3 hours until I got through some weird like time machine, don't want to go back and kill Hitler, I want to go back to being an olive tree so Van Gogh can hug me, whatever. I got to like a meaningful sentence for me, which is crystallizing something about mental health I've been thinking about for a long, long time. Is like even here, you'll see like I've got a Van Gogh on the wall, and I don't go to the immersive Van Gogh exhibits. That's not Van Gogh, and I don't even love this painting because this painting is, I think, one of his direct rebukes to Paul Gauguin, who, like, in a synthetist style, was starting to paint like Van Gogh as Jesus Christ and just olive trees, which he'd never seen, as he's doing a Gethsemane painting, and Van Gogh got that in one of his letters. This was him painting a tree he'd never seen before. The cypresses and the olive trees in 1889, when he was self-asylumed in the south of France, were like new experiences for him. And the cypress is very tall and kind of speaks straight to God. And I think all of the olive tree is sort of saying of the man. But like the thing that inspires me about Van Gogh is Van Gogh. Because like Van Gogh is so clearly mentally ill through most of his life, and his paintings aren't recognized at all during his life. He's not getting any of the help he needs. He does self-asylum, right? Like Theo, his brother, is sort of doing good things for him, and he loves various folks like Paul Gauguin and others. And maybe like you care that if it's like a homosexual relationship or he cuts off his ear to give to that, or, like, it doesn't matter those specifics. It matters he's mentally ill, and like people are celebrating like creative like looks at paintings, and they're creative because of like the weird ways his brain was processing things. And like that sort of form of that message was how, when I actually like sort of zoom out a bit, like that I'll sort of jump ahead and then jump back. It takes me some time to work through this message, but eventually it's like this very composed LinkedIn post we're going to come back to. And like when I really re-engage with the world, is figuring out, what does it mean, don't love the paintings, love Van Gogh? I don't have it then. Like at the end of the video, the dice have stopped. I have the sentence. I also honestly think the video is now interesting because it is about mental health, and I want to like shock the world in different ways about what that means. But I'm in a temporary furnished apartment in Seattle that I moved to help support my work. But like the internet is super, super slow. And then I get out my Pixel 5 and try to do a tether point, and the internet there is super, super slow. And I'm starting to panic that I have like this 24 gigabyte video that I'm not going to be able to share with the world. And I'm so exhausted and tired. Like maybe, the Googles who are listening in on all the things, that's not true. Like I trust Google. I trust most companies are watching out for themselves and their privacy of their users. They have to be. But anyway, some form of paranoia was like, how does this get out there? And so I said, well, go to the airport. The airport's got great internet. It's actually like compared to Denver's airport, like the SeaTac airport, like we're even better than Denver now. Like, and they actually were, like, by the time I drove to there. But in driving to there, I want to be out of Seattle right now. I want to be back home, like where internet's not an issue, where walking around Mercer Island's not an issue. And so my goal for the rest of this day, like again, this video isn't posted on this day. It's made this day. It's made from 6 to 9 a.m. And then I start driving south to SeaTac and then beyond. The PM of March 14th, Pi Day. I'm a Taoist, not a Pi like lover. It's a different conversation for another time. I didn't have energy to be walking again. Like I just walked so much on Sunday. But another thing that helps when I can't walk, I'm still a kinetic thinker, is just like motion. So driving is a good mental health therapy for me. And you say like no one should try to get all the way from Seattle to San Bruno in a day. And like I didn't know I was going to do it in a day. I thought maybe I'd stop in the middle and rest, but I just started. And again, I'd take a break every hour and a half or 2 hours. Like one of the first breaks, I think I have the order right here. I had Wendy's in a Washington State sort of place, the Frosties and the fries and those mixing. It's a very acquired taste, but sort of, I don't think I've had that in 4 years. I last had it with a Verily coworker when we were having one of our mental health days, and going to Wendy's for Frosty and fries as part of mental health. Like crossing the Oregon border, like was a sudden moment of elation. I don't know that it should have been, but at some stage, like Washington State and tensions adaptive, just not feeling home. Not that even San Bruno feels home right now. As I said this morning, like my best friend has now moved to Boston. I don't know where home is, but different can feel home. And I do own this property. Like all my puzzles and other like most prized possessions are here. My memories are here. It's sort of, as we go through the rest of the story, like being around all of that was maybe too much sudden exposure to positive emotions to really become manic. But like Get Out of Washington was a story for the afternoon of the 14th. And I set the video to release in the future, like at the airport around like noon. Let's release it at 6:28 p.m. That's just funny. And again, like tau, not pi. But I had lots of moments to stop it, and I actually did. So after I crossed the border, and then I said, it's probably good to message my like unofficial chief of staff, but message Kyle who can get out to the team. Like, I'm doing okay. I just taken a day off from work, may still take more time off. At the same time, in that kind of break, sort of stopped things. I stopped the video from posting. I continued driving south. The most natural place to stop, if it's not sort of the last things in Oregon, is probably Redding, California, to then do the last 3 or 4 hour sort of drive back to the Bay Area. And so I considered it, but I didn't do it for different reasons. Maybe not sort of in the best mode to be wanting to stay in Redding right then. And so continued driving, 3 a.m. sort of finished that. First thing I did was pause the GoFundMe, sort of put messages. We'd raised a few $1,000s. We were nowhere near 100,000. It didn't sort of get very far, but I also knew it was sort of without sort of the blessing of my leadership team, I shouldn't try to have this be a vessel to do too much good. At least like I still wanted to do that. I still honestly have income that I'm going to be giving to, the National Alliance for Mental Illness and other sort of charities. I hope sort of some of you are motivated to kind of give to other things and make sure. And in the same way, I put a lot of my money to Grandmaster Puzzles, which is not a profitable business, but something that is giving stress relief to people with poor mental health and poor mental illness, and just for people who love puzzles. So some sense of giving back is key to me. But anyway, Tuesday morning, I get back to home. I pause the GoFundMe. I sleep. This is about for 2 hours. I then put together a written description for the video. And this is a thing that most people, I think one of my editors in the site, Persona, I love you to the ends of the world, but like, I don't know why he took away the text, because taking away the text made this look even crazier. Like, again, there's a future Thomas mode, but the words were kind of composed and interesting. And so let me sort of give you the text that was meant to go alongside the YouTube video. And in this case, the video is just given a timestamp. It has a lot in it about how people's language is changing as they go through their life. And so it matters the language they're using, the time in which they say the words. So this was something I'd written the next day. If I go back in time, I guess like my PowerPoint's off, but this will be something. This is like, is this a UTC code? Maybe it's not off. Like, I wrote it in the morning after I completed the drive. And for those who can still appreciate Orson Scott Card's work from how he was in the 90s before 2001, I do view myself often in that kind of Ender Wiggin mode, but where I recognize I've done some things like kill the buggers in my life. I care a lot about being a speaker for the dead and speaking about the good and bad of people. And so this was me trying to write what it felt like to sort of have some elements of paranoia, schizophrenia, and delusion, which made me think I needed to be escaping from Seattle. I'm not saying I was actually paranoid or deluded. These are words I wrote. I can't give you the intention behind these words, but these were words I wrote. The only fact here is these were words I wrote. They were always meant to be with the video. I added them back to the video before making it private, but let's sort of go through them. So again, to future Thomas, you'll have seen this kind of structure before. Don't ever watch whatever the first 3 hours of this was until ready. You just needed to start speaking to figure out what problem you wanted to solve, as there's so much going on in the world right now, and the fact everyone wanted to give you a hug was somehow the least of your worries. That you weren't your best and needed help, when in actuality you were your best in your own ineffable way and needed help, but in an unexpected direction. Yes, you push yourself so hard, harder than ever before, stuff you can't remember, but that after it, those 30 seconds of clarity from don't love the paintings, love Van Gogh, and the dice settle. You knew you were lucid and had synthesized your life's meaning, but also that you were not well having done that. Your duty was now to release that amazing synthesis of your ideas, that the force of speech was now force of mind, and you had lost yours. Frightened at how much responsibility you felt and how little control you had. They won't know how paranoid and schizophrenic you felt. They'll be amazed at those 7 brilliant words. So honest and magnificent, and why hadn't anyone thought of something like that before? At least that is where it starts. That's how they think today. They understand words 2 through 4, and not all 7. They'll soon search that apartment for you and start the cable news feeds, and maybe the words won't get out. When they can't find you, they might track onto the fact that the internet was too slow, that plan B of a hotspot wasn't better, but probably not. That apartment scares you. It still does now, even as you process all the rest that you can remember and document now a day out. That your idea was so important Putin might nuke you, so you found Starbucks, all those around you, too obvious and unsafe. So the airport made sense if not just driving east with something air-gapped. Need to remember to research that in advance next time. Yes, focus, Thomas. Airport. Once you could figure out how to focus and drive there after being so close for minutes and miles. Then in a brief moment of clarity, you left a joke to the world. Your loved ones who would believe you were still sane as a safe private key for your thoughts. When 6:28 p.m. could be the release time to get your 30 seconds out there. To look for 6:28 was in the source documents. A safe future release to give you comfort so you could focus on getting better. But that you were so sick, so mentally ill, you destroyed your own message around 5-something p.m. when what getting better meant was driving all the way back home by yourself. Showing the weakness of messaging Kyle because you knew you had changed the world and now needed to reach out to those who were next in your heart, your family. But they would see you weren't yourself. So tell a half-truth and shut off the world again. Kept driving beyond everyone's best judgment. No sane person would do the trip in one day. That's why their search radius won't be your home when you get there. Certainly some state will sue for DUI. You'll never drive again, let alone ever be in a house and not an asylum. Afraid if you didn't get home to SSF, the commies would get you. That you were tired, but hotels required you to pay in cash and you weren't sure you still had your wallet or quarters for the payphone to get help. That you then worried how you had just destroyed your life and what friends respected of you. That they'll call your dad to try to help find you. And that's the last thing you'd want a stranger telling your dad, where a loved messenger and not a stranger has to share unexpected news to manage grief. That messages of good to prepare for crazy were seen as crazy. That to undo some lunacy was your first step once you got home. But just get home, 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 home. That was a focus even as you sort of got to the Bay Area, but don't understand Alameda and 1 a.m. and I'm already past where and what. Home. Home. Unlock the door. Get in. What the fuck did I do? All these messages and calls. You needed the first few hours of sleep and several months to get to the clarity was okay. And you hadn't had the sanity to just send the 7 words yesterday, and that you did have something to say, but the world would miss it in the 70,000 other things that won't make sense except the level 7 figures. You're totally sure for the first time in your life you said the N-word and not the N-word like you said. And you thank Joe Rogan, and oh my God, you thank Joe Rogan. You'll work through that. Actually, you don't have to. You engage an idea from their language because that is how you engage their mind. You're expressing a language here that they have never thought about. You still have to watch out for you now. You're the one looking at the boulder. That's today's one image, a boulder and Sisyphus. And you were finally well. The idea is so pure language couldn't express it. That thinking in new ways can be insane or can be evolution. Humanity 2.0. And I don't know if those words help the video or not. Like, I don't exactly know sort of how to express where they're coming from, but if from a speaker for the dead mentality, like where the last day was disorganized and just driving and like, why didn't I stop and all that, like, those were kind of various vague things that just popped up and like they assembled in that order and like quarters for a payphone. I don't know where that comes from, but like, that's as close as I feel I'd been in my life to having some kind of delusions and other things, worked through all of them, but had these random thoughts bouncing in my head and I wrote them out. And as a speaker for the dead, that might be useful, it might not. Like mental illness is so rare in form, I don't think people can see it routinely. And that's where like the message really to the professional world. The video was like to this puzzle corner and like people found it. But the message of the video, the professional worlds don't love the paintings, love Van Gogh. And I made sure this was plussed into Chad Robbins, the CEO of Adaptive, who I really respect and admire for all that he's done through the life of the company, stuff he's done to support me through that, and someone who is, the calls I wish I was taking, his were the ones I didn't want to be missing. And so I sort of forwarded the main post is below. We'll start with a message to chat. I'm so sorry I haven't been able to take your calls the last few days. I know I've caused you some pain by you being confused in my response. I knew you could hashtag be adaptive and handle something you couldn't understand at the time. Erase with me. Hashtag twoerasers. Hashtag mental illness awareness. And yes, of course, I got twoerasers here for a different meaning because that's sort of like I wanted to keep that connection even if it was a useful weird seed, because then even if the team was seeing it, it would come back to like innovation and all this other stuff. Anyway, the message to the world, to everyone worried about me, I want to say this. Don't love the paintings, love Van Gogh. Mental health and mental illness are challenging topics we do not speak about as much as we should. We can hear the repetition of Ravel's Bolero or see the unusual color combinations in a Van Gogh olive tree and wonder how they were made and be amazed by the novelty and call them brilliant. I do not see these as brilliant, and I do not love these works. They frighten me. I most wish I could identify the people who are able to paint like that, and more importantly, those who could because that is normal for their brains but who can't express it, to erase their mental illness and in so doing improve my mental health. I try to love Van Gogh and Ravel and many others you haven't heard of, to be there for them at the time of their lives and not at the time of the immersive shows with bright lights and none of the actual meaning of Van Gogh. You may not know whose pain you are trying to erase right now, but you know you want to erase mine. I know what I'm working hard to erase. We have two erasers. Let's work together on this one. And apropos of not too much else, but like through my life, I have a set of podcasts and things I look back at. And if you're not familiar with the story of Bolero and the story of repetition, but the story of someone losing parts of his brain and where that repetition may have been a way for him to keep control as he's starting to lose his mental capability. The Radiolab podcast episode, Unraveling Bolero, and yes, there's an awesome pun in that, and all the it's a fascinating study of art and malfunctioning brains. And there's a secondary story from Anne Adams that's tied to this. She was a painter and was even take up the act of painting Bolero. That like, if you don't know anything about mental illness, and this is not a common form of mental illness, what you can view as visionary and great works can come from people who are honestly sick and ill and need care. And being unusual can be a sign of genius and can be a sign of health. And being unusual can also be a sign of the opposite. And if anything, I hope you see me a little more like Da Vinci, who didn't kind of go like sort of end his life soon or have mental illness. Van Gogh did, Bolero did, in different forms, in different ways the brain degenerated and they lost their capability. But that's how poor we are at even distinguishing mental health from mental illness. And you can have a miserable day or week or month or quarter. You can be hypomanic for long periods of time. You can even have days you're just trying to escape Seattle. And that doesn't have to impact how you're viewed the whole of time. But there are people who don't have that luxury, who don't have that agency or power, who are ill. They don't know how to speak up. They don't want to speak up. They don't want to like even like be seen without hair, like in a metaphor of that, because of how you'll approach them with sympathy and not empathy. You'll like ruin the whole thing. So to kind of get back through the morning of Tuesday, got home, slowed down the GoFundMe, slept, wrote the LinkedIn message, completed a posting for the video, and then I just started driving south again. Again, like I was a little tired to walk, but I was good to drive. There's a specific place, I won't give you my favorite spot in California, but if you go far enough south along the California one, you'll eventually hit it. It's further south than Santa Cruz. You're getting closer by the time you're in Monterey. But sort of getting food, getting cash. I wanted to be off the grid a bit, or at least feel, again, like mentally just feel off the grid. Just having like $400 in my wallet and a phone that was fully offline, well, mostly offline with some form of that start of the day. But then a little bit sort of reawoke because I had all these thoughts, and that video was not how I wanted to express these thoughts. I wanted to express the thoughts in a useful way, and this also was not a useful distillation, but at least maybe today in trying to present these thoughts in this way, I had a Twitter storm, and I've never used my Twitter account in about 2 or 3 years. But at Dr. Sudoku would start to send different messages down. This was the first one. Like one of the other podcasts I love from Radiolab is an example called Tit for Tat. which describes, not in a complex way where you need like deep machine learning or anything else. You don't need coding competitions to solve for how to win the repeated prisoner's dilemma. If someone acts against your purpose in one round of the prisoner's dilemma, you respond, you betray them in the next round, and then you return to love if they've returned to love, and working together. And so that's a way that never loses. You can do it in 2 lines of code as described in the podcast. And in the podcast, they also describe how on the front lines during World War I, like the German and British and other sides would like start to figure out during the tea time breaks, they could just like stop trying to kill each other because there wasn't meaning to how they were killing each other, until the generals recognized those détentes weren't good for the war and they came back to it. But there's like something about Humanity 1.0 war games, and this is about tic-tac-toe. The only way to win is not to play. Humanity 2.0 is recognizing we're in a repeated prisoner's dilemma, and tit for tat is the solution. The way that never loses is to show you can hate but always forgive, or really just love. And love is not sycophancy. It's not only positive. Constructive criticism is part of love, and then as kind of reward and support, at least as I understand it. Here's another Twitter storm. This is about sort of communication. Again, communicate to people, not at people. And when you communicate to people, you have to use their individual language. It's not just saying English. Like, I'm speaking an American form of English, but I have like the words I know and the words I don't know, and they'll be different than even like my neighbor's meaning of English. And it's also in this exact moment. Like, the things I know today is how you're speaking to me today. 10 years from now, I may be a different person, may know different words, may have different life memories, may have had an event like September 11th change how I think or how I like view the world politically or anything else. And so like people do change. Like if you view language as a static thing and your communication styles as a static approach to someone in your life, like that's the first thing to test. Maybe you haven't talked to a high school friend in the 2 years of COVID, but like figure someone you've not communicated to in a while, tell an old story in the old language, but see how you both have changed as a consequence. So if that's the kind of the t-shirt sentence in the top, like here's an example, Twitter 1.0. It's 144 characters, and Japanese is better than English. Like, you understand the Japanese language has more meaning than A through Z. But communication was garbage. Twitter 2.0 equals 144 ideas. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then that is the first way to 144,000. Just remember there are blind people. They are literally your blind spot. Think of your blind spots first and yourself last. Another example, biotech 1.0, 100 great companies with the same idea of changing medicine through big data and machine learning, but never enough data, never enough data, and never collaborating because of capitalism. And I'm not trying to throw the industry under the bus, but like this is just frustration being vented out through like different channels. Like, this was not about adaptive. This was about every place I've worked and every place I've interviewed and every place I don't want to interview, but I know what they'll say. Like, it's data, and we're gonna have like this cycle of learning. We're gonna solve biology. It's like you have one platform piece in a systems biology, multi-omics, complicated realm. Like, you can't. No single company is going to win this battle. Those 100 great companies are all set to lose right now at really changing medicine. Biotech 2.0, 100 great companies, the same 100 great companies with the same idea to change healthcare by working together, actually with big data. And there's some public-private keys, there's some blockchain. There are ways to really have this sharing matter, but where the patient is always first and the stock index last. I could go on for hours on this one. I could go on for hours on other things. Thomas overthinks everything, but like, at least these are some good thoughts. If I'm still put in asylum after this, like, come back to this one as an example. This needs to be unpacked and reworked. I think the first one is clear, but how to really describe it for those who aren't software engineers or really into encryption is tricky. But understand, just as with computer encryption, all information has public and private components. Here's an example. A public aspect of my appearance is I'm white, I'm male, I don't have much hair right now. A private aspect is how brilliant I am, but as soon as I start to talk, you at least have some public sense of what that is. And other information's like that too. And trust and verification to yourself, with others, across people is built by knowing both what is the public and what is the private side of that information. If your brain still thinks your home address is private information, you may want to make America great again because you're behind technology. Your home address is now public information. The lock on your door is private if you're using it right, but who should know your home address? How you share it is different now, right? But that's catching up with trust and verify, like Reagan's great words, even if you don't respect Ronald Reagan. Trust but verify. Trust and verification is built by understanding public and private sides. And tied to that, these bottom messages are more at the level of make Orson Scott Card great again. Get that on a t-shirt. Recognize things and people change. That includes their knowledge, their skills, their health. It should not be a complex conversation to say, I view myself as Ender Wiggin, as well as much as Peter and as Valentine. And that's been someone that inspired me with their brain and their works, Orson Scott Card, circa last century, but who now might have mental illness or who might have been influenced by the events of 9/11, as many of us were. Like, we should still see the person and help them and remember their greatness. Like, we all will eventually decay and die. If there's any story about remember zero infinity, our paths are to zero. God's is infinity, but we're not God. So we should still help the person, remember their greatness, be a speaker for the dead, understand failures more than successes, or at least equally with successes. Have your public trust key in your resume be your failures. In the interview, share the private key of those successes, how you think, why you're going to be adding ideas to the team. You'll get my jobs, and they won't feel like work when you're interviewing with me. One of the things I've been trying to teach my team over time, and I might have like, I think these are let me even just like while I'm doing this, I'm just going to make this slide better by these are three very distinct thoughts. They're just all awesome in their own ways. So live edit, we'll go through these in this kind of way. One of the things most important right now in this world is understanding who knows stuff. And a lot of us are interested in knowing stuff. Let's take COVID. Everyone at the time we were told to stay at home and worry the heck about things and do masks matter and 6 feet and all this stuff. We all started to probably like use Google, Bing, our network of friends. Probably not like, most of us are probably pretty far from Anthony Fauci and other sort of people, but level 1 learning is knowing nothing and wanting to learn more. And like, it's awesome when you're level 1. Like some people are level 0. There are skills you may never want to pick up. But if we were all level 1 in COVID in March of 2020, we didn't know much. We wanted to learn more. We were looking for experts to learn from. Recognize everyone's learning journey in every situation is to probably get to what I'll call level 2 learning first, which is where you've learned it wrong, or at least learned it not fully. So you're making assumptions from your knowledge, but those assumptions are wrong. This is very, very bad. It's often called Dunning-Kruger effect. Level 2 people out in the world are the most dangerous, and they'll get you sort of believing like Clorox is something you should be drinking Clorox was a poison before COVID. It may kill the virus a bit. It'll kill you much more. Like level 3 is now still working with the experts, people who are like further up, level 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. But learning it well enough to now become humble about it, because you know there's stuff you don't know about it. You know, and you'll start to say things like, I expect it's like this. I have these reasons to think it's like this. I could be wrong. And level 3 thinkers, most of the time you can even remove that it could be wrong at the end, and they're far better than level 2 people. But the humility they use to approach it is there. And what you'll recognize, and what it took me a long time, I used to have one hiring bias, which is I would always hire anyone who had a Caltech degree, and you should not have any institution where people learn be a hiring bias. But what I learned is Caltech makes everyone, even as they become level 4 to level 100 people, we're all like pretty humble in our normal states. Only when I'm hypomanic do I start to speak up so much. We may know a lot more than the room, but we try to at least approach the humility and respect of conversations, because we know others are probably level 1 or even level 2 people. And if you approach them with hate and say you're stupid and you're wrong, you're ignorant, why are you on the team? Like, you're not going to get to level 3. Like, everyone will go through level 2. Let's coach and teach them into level 3 and level beyond. And that's how we grow as a society. We've got to have people that are smart enough to, like, if we ourselves don't know that level 2 is the issue, but we all need to move through it, we can't do much better. So this is a seminar series. Just Google Dunning-Kruger and start there. But like, this is a thing I've been thinking about for a long time as someone whose mother was a teacher, like great for level 1 people, but never a coach. Like, being a manager is taking level 3 people to be level 4, and you don't teach them anymore. You coach them to grow those ongoing skills. And it's very interesting how we learn and grow as teams. Eventually, we're not even learning as people. Like, how does the group have level 1 learning and level 2 and level 3 learning? How does society have level 1, level 2 learning? I think in the videos, the kind of mention of like thanking Joe Rogan has a level 4 plus approach to conversation, which he'll just talk for 3 hours and just like actually have an honest conversation. There aren't like rehearsed notes or anything like people are looking back. And just to be clear, like this is empty. I didn't want to sort of show you I had rehearsed notes. But conceptually, like the 6-minute interviews on they're talking point, talking point, talking point. And what you'll hear is, I'm asking a question. Doesn't matter what the question is. I'm going to start to answer with one of the talking points, one that's close-ish to the question. Like, that's not conversation. And that's why, like, if Joe Rogan will have a 3-hour conversation with people, that's a good thing. But if he's having level 2 speakers as his like expert, that's a bad thing. And so if he can improve his selection of who to talk with, he's got the honest dialogue. Like, I'm even making a video where we had 1:10. Like, this will wind up soon, I hope. Like, maybe 1:30 is the target this time. This is just honest dialogue, and I don't have anyone like asking me questions, but like this is not a video where it's going to be about questions. Here's another one. This is for the video game lovers. Like, one of the things, if I have time, I think right now I just got a device. I'll get Final Fantasy VI on it again. I'll play it again. I remember it's Final Fantasy III, but accept challenges and build to help others. Think hard about these thoughts. Here's a statement. I've never used a megalixir in any Final Fantasy game. And a megalixir is like an all-powerful potion. It kind of cures all party members of all effects and health, or some set of those things. Maybe in some games it's not the effect status. And I've never used one. And maybe you can say, well, I'm going to save it for the next harder boss. Well, eventually the game ends. It's not like, and eventually there's a sequel to the game. So like even the meaning of final in Final Fantasy is like the most like, it really doesn't understand infinity. But in Final Fantasy Infinity, I'll have like 100 megalixirs and I'll figure out maybe I'll use one. I don't know, but I've never used a megalixir. But one of my life goals in biology and medicine is to know how to make such a thing, like how to cure a whole lot of ailments, how to really understand and personalize therapy so you get someone back to their full potential, even if the world's been attacking them, whether through fire spells or ice spells or poison or just literally they've been attacked with swords and knives and other weaponry. One of my life goals is to know how to make a megalixir that you can put on a t-shirt. Here's a very different one. It gets to like a whole set of myth of Sisyphus things. It's you know, how do we sort of work together as a society? Entropy is a law of nature. Today, entropy is also a law of human nature. Only the first was proved in the past. Let's test the second right now. Like when we're fighting against each other, when we can't even figure out how to have Ukraine and Russia not like eventually grow to destroy the world, where it's us versus them, where religions, even though they share a lot of the belief structures about being good, moral, and honest, being passed towards heaven, it's still within like the belief in their God, and belief in other gods is still pagan. Like that's not us with us. It's us versus them, and it's not like we're creating entropic interactions where we're going to hurt each other or disorder disorder the world. And yes, like the random collision of particles and the way heat and entropy work, that Newton's second law of thermodynamics is very, 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 very true, is a law of nature. But how we as a society behave is not necessarily a law of our nature. We're just acting as if it is. So anyway, again, if like the two emails, two erasers thing was a place to, at some stage, just even sending all these tweets in the world should have been a resting point. And it kind of was. Like I had another very good day. The look of and I sort of go through, like I got back to my house after doing the driving trip. I was just thinking through different things. I got to that remember 0 to infinity thing. At some stage, it's kind of like, you know, Truman Show mode is me talking while I was driving home in the car. So I really wish my car had been bugged. And if it was bugged, there's some great audio somewhere out there of me going off on some things. But, you know, getting 0, death, integers, humanity as we live. But we can work as like a group of 1. We can work as 3. We can work as 7 billion. We're not infinity. That's maybe the divine. But the power of 7 billion people pushing up a boulder is where Sisyphus is one, never got it to the top of that hill. And you can like the myth of Sisyphus being like the struggle. I'd like the future of Sisyphus to be like we'd get the boulder to the top of that hill, and then we recognize that boulder as it just goes down the other side, and like maybe we now like focus on the important things, which aren't the boulder or the hill. I then, like, at the end of the day was just listening to or reading sort of other, I'll call them source documents. So I was just going back through some things in the last sort of life. I was talking about cargo cult science. I'll come back to this. It's something that Richard Feynman described a bit. I was thinking about level two thinkers. The thing that got me to where I was just so exhausted slash laughing at myself was I started to, after I like admitted I didn't have a solution for Putin, came back to the thing that most people in the world seem worried about, which is Wordle. And then after the New York Times purchased Wordle and they like changed the word list a bit, like there's now a bifurcation of Wordle. And I said like, the level of energy given to this and it's a fun distraction. Like I know why people love it. Like we're in a world that's so desperate and sad right now that like even just having like I got a 3 or I got a 2, I got a 2, like luck, but I got a 2. Like these are good things. So I said like, well let's see like where is there a different intellectual challenge? You want one? I started to play again. I was like having a conversation in my bedroom. Like the door was locked. Like and maybe people were listening in. I was having a conversation with an audience, just like in the Truman Show. So some form of paranoid delusion if you want to sort of see that. So again, go back to your scorecard. Is Thomas sane at this moment or not? Was saying, well, what if we even try to optimize in a different way? What if we played super hard mode? And like hard mode is like once you know a letter's in the word, like yellow or green, you got to keep using it. If it's green, you got to keep in the exact same space. Well, maybe not. Like some people will break hard mode and not do that. I don't think that's required. I said, what if once you get a letter in yellow mode, you got to keep it in yellow mode as long as you can? What if you got to get like all 5 letters in yellow before you can work on the word? And I think the word that day was carrot. I'm sorry if that's a spoiler. I was like a week and a half ago. Like there are bigger things to worry than like carrot being the word. But I had like 4 of the 5 letters in that, and there's so many anagrams that word. There's trace, there's cater, and some of those have like the CA of anyway, like I just like started to laugh at myself in the world about Wordle and I fell asleep. So this is like one of the good things about sort of extreme mania and just like all this stuff. Like I actually got a pretty long stretch of sleep and the star the next morning during the Twitter storm was in contact with one of my puzzle friends and she gave me a suggested address of someone I might be able to stay with. And it's on a street I like for Bang 23 knew a lot about. I didn't expect residential addresses, at least in my normal number space of that. And the number she gave me was something that actually worked in splitting apart the digits to be a Digiday like door unlock code that my other best friend from college would have known about. So it seemed a little suspicious. But anyway, I decided I'll just first I slept for 4 hours and I just like took an 8-mile walk. And I walked all the way from San Bruno over to Burlingame, specifically Burlingame Ave. I didn't actually go by the exact address, but I made sure it made sense for what it was, and it was actually a place I could stop and get care and attention. Like I didn't needed the time. I continued then down the street, got some hot chocolate at a Starbucks. It felt important to do that at a Starbucks. And here's a typo we'll just fix here. And then I took a photo to send to my best friend, the one who just traveled to Boston today. And it's not, I mean, my hair is cut off at this point. I didn't sort of mark, I think maybe in the timeline it's not clear sort of when my hair is cut off. But some time in that, before driving south, after I got back to San Bruno, I cut off on my hair. But so it's not obvious sort of under the hat I'm wearing, but this is my Radiohead t-shirt, if you know that sort of neck collar and this light brown color from another video. I eventually sort of then had my second professional connection back to the world. Like the Twitter storm was the prior day. Here's then a message. The second, again, like the Van Gogh was the first and this is the second. Just again, like why was I having such an extreme response to just having to lay off 2 people? Because it wasn't just about that. At some stage it has to do with, again, like the flashbulb moment in my life, at least at the time, was when I first heard my mother had stage 4 breast cancer. As in my second year of graduate school. We didn't have any sense of when she would die. We knew it was a crucible in some ways. It made us come closer as a family. We valued time together more. We definitely, I was blessed that the kind of targeted therapies gave me 14 more years to prepare. But at some stage, like, and I won't share these today, but the emails I wrote to a friend, again, like just dropping ideas out in a way I could share them 2 days and 6 days and 2 weeks after that passing are remarkably composed and interesting and get at like my relationship with my dad, my relationship with religion, sort of how I have not sort of been as open to be able to allow girlfriends into my life, although I was writing this to my longest girlfriend sort of through Caltech and Harvard when I was at graduate school, who like experienced me hearing this diagnosis with me, and so it was important to write to her. But anyway, wrote this on LinkedIn again. Like I had 14 years to prepare for my mother's death, for the next time in my life. You know, that day she died, not just for me, but for my father and my family, and then for myself. While I was somewhat prepared despite limited time for this week's challenges, that to be the reduction in workforce, having to lay off some of the team members. Seeing my team was not prepared and I had done a poor job teaching when that was my mother's main passion led to a breakdown. And it did. Like, I think this set of evidence of the Twitter storm and the video and even the two erasers email, it's well beyond my normal action. It may be a hypomanic breakdown, not a manic breakdown, but it wasn't standard work. I drove all the way to San Francisco because I didn't want to be in Seattle anymore. That's not a healthy sentence. It made me healthier to have done it, but it's not a good reaction to kind of have flight. Neither fight nor flight are necessarily great responses, but when you have either of them in a description, you probably are being pushed to an extreme point. So anyway, led to a breakdown, but not to mental illness. I'm interested in having a conversation of planning for grief. The things will still surprise, and it's helpful to know when and how to reach out, and hashtag empathy, not sympathy, and so much more. I like to propose an agenda like preparing for a crisis before the crisis, with a general discussion from experts. Thomas will then present his case study by approaching this like a graduate thesis, but over 14 years. So I guess 3 graduate theses of how to like approach being ready for my mother's death. And then the panel will grade Thomas's approach and the group will discuss learnings. Second concept, reacting during a crisis. Again, start from a general discussion from experts, like what is good crisis leadership? And then Thomas will present his case study using written thoughts during the days after the events of his mother's death from cancer in 2018. Note, not memories of the event, written thoughts to come back to, like source documents that were written at the time and accurate for the time about what was being processed. Your memory will fail you. Different podcasts from Revisionist History, Free Brian Williams, something you should go to and understand that. I'll talk about that more somewhere else. And then again, the panel grading that approach. And so other topics maybe like that. Nothing about this past week that I've parked by disconnecting from everyone that wants to help me, but doesn't actually know how to. I need an expert. So I reached out to Tom Insel. He'd be more interested in the mental health side than on the grief source side, but he's someone who at Verily was definitely working on how devices could be sensing. And I'd say, like, for things I know, like this is a helpful way to track my mental health, but it's not so easy to featureize for everyone else. You know, even how well I do on like a fixed Sudoku puzzle is a good way to understand. Like my use of homophones incorrectly in written text is actually the best sense of how tired I am. And I've got some typos and things before there is probably screwed up in different spots. So anyway, that was the morning, writing that LinkedIn. And then this is the stage that probably breaks me and gets me to the one reason I got into an asylum. I think it's a mental care ward at a hospital. I guess like in the US, we probably, until people are fully diagnosed and super convinced to have that. Observation is not done in asylums these days, although there are asylums. But this is as close as I was going to come to one. And this is where, just because I had time was still disconnecting, I was coming back to what I always wanted to do or told other teams about, was build an escape house. And this is some extreme form of an escape room where there would be like, 5 or 6 rooms in my house, my bedroom being the hardest to get into. But at some stage, I had my front door unlocked for the 2 days prior. I even had a tweet saying this wasn't Ready Player One. The only thing at the finish line of this sort of whatever this was going to be like my love and interest. But at some stage, the bedroom door was locked, or at least no one could come into it with me. No one was actually in my house at the time, but if anyone had showed up, they would have explained the engagement rules. And I would have some ideas in that bedroom. I was even like, to give people a back door. I was having like the back window open so people could see in, although eventually I was using aluminum foil to cover that for light reasons. But I slowly building challenges when I exited. And another thing is I was trying to re-engage with podcasts I loved, or even signals, but I'd be playing them at 3x speed, 1x speed, or 0.5x speed, and even using the speed as a potential signal to myself and to others about things I knew and had processed, things I was trying to process, and things were too much for me. I need to slow myself down. And there were a set of podcasts I was re-listening to where the 0.5x speed was critical. And anyway, there's evidence I didn't put together for today, but I've got a lot of Nest Cam footage. I will probably only ever keep this for self-review, but of different moments when I was not in the bedroom. The bedroom has no Nest Cams in it. But when I was exiting for the living room of doing things, some things I did in exiting for living room was doing the equivalent of Ready Player One, of building like 2 or 3 doors of challenges to get into my bedroom. And one of these came not when I was doing my first re-listen, which is to the Roman Mars Mazda virus. Is actually I had a friend who was having me challenge my definition of family, where I was using the meaning of genetic family of being like 100% related or 50% related. It's actually funny that the Roman Mars Mazda virus is a podcast that gets that sense of relatedness, and how like we are too hung up on genetic as the only meaning of family as a whole society and culture, that even if you adopted someone, you view them differently than if like they have the same father or the same mother as the chromosomes sort of in those cells. But anyway, like after listening to that, I got to listening to the Tit for Tat podcast, and some of that is saying like rewriting the history books as a thing was important to do. It's even weird. I'm proud of certain times and things we did as America. I'm not proud we dropped 2 nuclear bombs. I think 1 nuclear bomb was enough. Two sort of shows we don't have the confidence to be a good player, to have love. Like that's a little hurtful. But anyway, like listening to the Tit for Tat podcast had me like rethink to a particular time in my life where I was rewriting some form of the books in the past, and I laid out for here. And it was set on top. I think it was set on top. In reconstructing this, it may or may not be fair. I had a kind of random like graduate school paper which had like the Chico Kakutani and sort of other things on it. But I wrote door one question mark. I think I last played Trivial Pursuit in 2007. I remember the concept of my color. When did you play, and does it matter? And I also have a bauble holding this on. It's on top of a book. But anyway, there's a structure of intent that my puzzle community would probably be able to like fully dissect. This was one such challenge I left to the world. There's a thing I didn't sort of go through like this timeline. There's a Netflix meta and a Meatloaf meta. So let's talk about the Netflix meta. I have been very deliberate to never have Netflix in my life. And it's not to say I don't, and sometimes I've even like gotten like DVDs of Netflix series, the ones that were maybe meaningful to follow, to at least understand some part of the cultural zeitgeist of those things. But I don't like to stream media at that pace, and I have such a backlog of stuff I haven't watched. My sense of getting to Netflix is like a year of inability to actually do stuff. Like if I don't have good self-control, like I'm lost to the world. So anyway, I've always built up in my head, like I just will never, and this was even when Netflix was an awesome company and all the stuff it did. Like now there are so many players in the space. Like what I do have is HBO as an example. And what I do is like watch Succession each week it comes out. I don't like stream it all in a day. Like in the same way, like I watched Lost and I watched The Wire like kind of as they came out, or at least like I rewatched The Wire recently. But I was trying to space out like a couple days between episodes, write out thoughts, like what are things, like experience the show by thinking the show, not just going to the next plot point. So anyway, like never getting to Netflix, I felt there was at least a useful meta of the rest of you all testing me, of trying to identify a specific derivative work, that is to say, a book that became a Netflix series, that in different ways my friend community, but no individual person, might be able to assemble. And I had a few different hints towards what would be the answer for the Netflix meta. One is this Exhibit 1. This was written, maybe there's information on the front, which is a gas receipt from the pump house at around, what does it say, 2 a.m. This is like the last gas before I did get back to home. This is around the Alameda area, wherever Pinole, California is. I missed the San Francisco turn, so I took a slower route through the San Mateo Bridge. I think that's what going to Pinole would make sense of. But anyway, in the back of that, I wrote what you see in the bottom here, and some form of those words may suggest a book, certainly by a particular author. It may separately suggest an author, not necessarily of that book. And there's some public info, it's not in this deck, about like what's on my bookshelf in my guest bedroom. But I figured that my best puzzle friend, after getting the answers from the first parts, like that potential book or potential author, would be able to connect to other books not on my bookshelves, but know an answer to a potential thing that she had helped. I'll even say it's a she. She had helped me experience, and so she would know the derivative work, because she's the reason I like have read that book long before. And it's not a book that people would know I've ever read, long before it ever was near Netflix. Different exhibit, still towards the same goals. Here's a cross-stitch calendar that I have really only ever had in my closet since posting it a little bit during college. I think I sewed this as a high school student, as just a way to, you have all these little cards, and you got the numbers and the dates, but it took a lot of time to do, but I do fine crafting when I care. And I gifted this to my mother, but she didn't keep it. So I had this back from college and forward. And so anyway, I made this puzzle. And so this was hanging on my wall, like if you were in my house that day. It's not there now, like it's back in the closet, of an August date, sort of different flowers sort of around that, like unusual presentation of the calendar. But anyway, there's an artist you could get from knowing me in college that might have a similar leap to a different muse. Someone that might have a Boston or at least East Coast association, because again, it was like towards Harvard, that should help, but maybe more obliquely also get towards a Netflix answer. And there are even other paths to the Netflix meta answer, but regardless, here are examples of puzzles I was writing for no one to solve. And like this was a little bit of like unhealthy mania. Eventually, and I don't know why or how, I think I'd taken some like holiday cards, which were meant to be my most private of private keys, and associated I pulled out two fail safes or keywords that would be things that I wouldn't expect anyone could give, but if I saw those signals coming back would sort of matter. And I like half just went to the Netflix site to see what sign up would look like. And one of the things that intrigued me was they had languages to choose from. And some of the languages, like they had Portuguese, but also Brazilian Portuguese. And like they mapped pretty well to like World Puzzle and World Sudoku Championship sites I'd been at, and also stuff I'd never been at. And so like, and then I got to like the set of series, and one of my fail safes, like Emily in Paris or whatever the actual name of the series is, like broke both of my fail safes at the same time. So I did just suddenly like get Netflix. I never actually watched it. After I got out of the hospital, I've canceled that, I guess, by April, some number, 15, 16, April 16. I won't actually have it. Maybe eventually I'll like have the control to do it. Like I built this up to be such a big thing. It's stupid. It's a big thing. But anyway, like the Netflix firewall was cracked in the middle, like at 5:30. Later on, the Meatloaf meta was cracked. So one of the I don't even know if I can tell this story. So my mom wasn't an awesome cook, right? We had kind of Midwest Buffalo, New York. She was from Van Wert, Ohio, is where my dad, his father was a preacher. So, you know, the connection was sort of through the Lutheran Church in Van Wert, Ohio. But um, well, mom was an awesome cook. There are meals that we love to have, and both my dad and I had a fondness for the meatloaf that mom would make. And in her last week of life, when she was really probably dealing with tons of pain and other stuff, like she made dad a last meatloaf, and dad would go on for hours about just that story and that attention. And so I've not never had any meatloaf since mom's passing, but I have in one of my cupboards a list of her recipes, and in one of them I like pulled out like what would it mean to make a meatloaf. And I had a set of the ingredients I needed. Didn't have all of them, but one thing that's needed is one egg, and like I never eat eggs. It's one of my things. But some form of, after I preheated my oven to 350 Fahrenheit, was saying, "Okay, Google, have Amazon Prime deliver me one." I shouldn't. My phone's about to act up. Sorry. I will stop the "okay" followed by company name. Have Amazon Prime deliver me one egg, rush delivery, no tip. And that's because all of those are against my values. I would never want to order just one thing with rush delivery with no tip. Like I also don't have Amazon Prime. I try when I can to not order from Amazon. It's not that I don't believe in that sort of service. I think it's until they get sort of the automation or drones or other things in the delivery, there's a little bit of the dehumanization of the workforce that I'd like worry about there. I probably over worry about it there. But anyway, like this was another sort of firewall to not break. And anyway, by this point it was clear like I was in a puzzle hunt space, and like I started to think about public and private keys, and where like my front door is open, but like the back door, my bedroom door is like carefully locked, and like I have a side gate door that I was pretty sure had like one of the Google's building codes or like GOOG and phone numbers or anything else. Is like it doesn't open that way. But I got to where it's like I need to like go in a dark room and just like figure out the connections I've been seeing through friends, and like what's the thing I'm solving for. And so not so much to show here. I kind of have anonymized with boxes, lots of stuff, but making all sorts of connections through my social network, figuring out the what and the when and the who. Like Who is a puzzle hunt, and Neil Patrick Harris was a guest kind of like character in the Who puzzle hunt. And I have played in a Microsoft puzzle hunt with Ken Jennings, and there are different things. Like we did a Hamilton puzzle together. So one of my challenges in life is to figure out how to like tell someone I love her, but where I'm starting from thinking my dearest comma Angelica from the musical Hamilton is a way to do that. But this is a person who really knows Italian and not English. Like there's a lot of insanity here, but some form of doing this was I was pretty sure I had solved for the actual like the front gate lock of my house, which I did not. I still can't open it. I need to cut it off. But in doing that, I locked myself out of my house and had through like that whole day locked myself out of a set of the rooms of the house. So I could, after a little bit, I know how to break back into certain places, and break in is sometimes like breaking, but more often it's not. In this case, I used a route that shouldn't have led to damage, but did, because it was trying to displace a window to be able to reach in and sort of move up a lock. It actually did break the window physically this time. That got me to my basement room, my garage. I got a few more hours of email sent out, some good LinkedIn connections, good thing. All these emails, when I look back at them, are helpful and healthy. But as I eventually was going to the garage and using the sink in that space to wash my hands, I came back to something that was part of one of my longer sort of rants to myself about cargo cult science. Let's sort of talk about cargo cult science from Richard Feynman. The story was after World War II and about, during the war as the US was slowly getting more and more Pacific islands and moving sort of closer to have a potential beachhead into Japan and sort of winning that. They would set up on these islands temporary airstrips. They'd like cut down trees and they'd sort of close, sort of get the dirt out. And you'd have people now with like lights on sticks and they'd be doing this. And so, natives of these islands, not knowing what was going on, would watch this kind of action on an airstrip and like cargo would fall from the sky. Like the literal deus ex machina of like help would just like food and, and megalixirs and whatever else was in those boxes were coming in. And so the cults, not knowing any better after the war, tried some of the same things. They like cut down trees and they like take sticks and they like paint them. And this could be an apocryphal story, but Feynman's point was that it's critical you actually follow the scientific method and not just have something that has the trappings and the appearance of what people do when they're able to signal the cargo from the skies down. And so some form of that is like if we're even all as a world level 2 thinkers about the existence of God, and I think that's fair, we may have level 0, level 1. Like, what is the scientific method to ask a question about a greater power? And here is where, not remembering my house well enough, I failed the cult science test of not, like, I was washing my hands and I was starting to say the Lord's Prayer, which I rarely say, but no, I know well, like the Apostles' Creed and other stuff. I know a lot of the works. I've read the Bible. I've read other religious texts. I don't actively practice a faith because I'm not sure the churches are sort of going behind the things I want, but like the humanism and you can sense I'm trying to be a good empathic person always. I said this like, God, I'm about ready to just like call up my friends and say like I just need a break, but like I really do think this is some like bigger puzzle hunt or bigger challenge for me. Like there's one person who is at the center of my social networks who is not on any of these pages, but someone who I would call my puzzle father. And so I said if there's any reason to actually just go and run to his house, like give me a sign. And so I'm just washing my hands on this, and I only know this from watching the Nest Cam later. I have a remote light in my garage that turns on through motion. I felt it was still on. Like I didn't experience any of it being off, but in the midst of doing that prayer and washing my hands, like it turned on and I had my eyes closed because in my prayer, like I try to shut off all the senses. So at least if I am trying to speak to myself or to a divine power, I think it's to both when we pray. At least I think the mindfulness is sometimes our conscious and subconscious minds. Got a massive like just white light kind of experience of like, yes, like go run to your father. And I I was absolutely sure I didn't want to like have devices or anything on me. So I just like I had some clothes, I had a jacket, I had pants, I had running shoes. I'm almost always wearing running shoes. You never know when you need to like run 6 or 8 miles. So I I, I did the cult science test. I asked a question of God during the midst of the Lord's Prayer. My automatic light in my garage turned on during it. I didn't recognize that. So anyway, it's like anyway, I did really like both my best friend and my puzzle father, like at that time were within like 2 houses of each other. So it's a credible thing to start. But as I was doing this and still talking to myself, I got to where Thursday morning the kind of puzzle father story connected back to like the Christ, God the Father, the vengeful God, and Holy Spirit story of again the threesome. And in the same way, Ender, Valentine, and Peter are sort of a threesome. Like God the Father, Jesus Christ, and then the Holy Spirit are sort of different ways of that. Like as I was running like 4 or 5 miles in, for instance, on one of the side sort of benches on El Camino was someone that looked kind of a little bit homeless, not sure they were homeless. But if again some part of the story is to always be giving, like I asked, like, are you okay? Like, do you need this jacket or anything? He didn't sort of answer for those things, but slowly, like through those interactions, I was giving up sets of my clothing. Burlingame streets are horrible. I didn't have a phone, so I knew a direct path would be sort of through my best friend's house to the street I need to get to, but I was trying to like avoid temptation. At least knew like the devil would be having temptation, like bright lights and churches and other places, and I wasn't going anywhere near those. And in that running, I eventually got to like Country Club Boulevard, which is not, or Country Club something, which isn't a good thing to do. But I looped back. I was going to say, well, I'm going to just use the right hand rule because like left is sinister and follow this. But if there are loops or issues, and I got to like Mobius strip, and like the word strip, I just did strip, and then I continued still running. There's a thing I didn't learn or know about Burlingame streets, but now know very well today. Like sometime between midnight, maybe 1 a.m., and then through to like 6 a.m., all the traffic lights on El Camino Real, they stopped doing the normal thing they do, which is like green, yellow, red cycling. They actually just go to be like yellow light only stop. And so I'd never experienced that before. So when I was running out, it was normal green, yellow, red traffic. And I got lost in like the Floribunda Country Club, like Hillsborough Avenue way. And I come back to El Camino Real, and like I just see like yellow lights, but in the direction I want to go, and red lights all places. I think I'm seeing another sign from God at this time, and all it is like it's just different like traffic light sort of pattern in this thing. But anyway, like I do run, I do like try to wave down some cars and no one has. Say like, do you know the way to? And I won't give the street name out here, and like they didn't have. So I eventually find the street of my friend's house. I turn on it, but at that time now I have police behind me trying to stop me. And I don't want them to stop me, but I also don't want, like, if they can give the right help, if they can get me to my father's house, that was fine. I eventually get to the street of my father's house, but before I get all the way there are now like a whole set of police around, and um, I have all the looks of privilege, so I appreciate that like the experience I got from those police may not be where everyone starts, but for them to deal with as crazy as I've probably ever been in my life, to be living out a Jesus Christ moment saying, if I'm even willing to be sacrificed by having police kill me, if that's the end of my story, that was like, they did a hell of a job to calm me down, to get me in safely. And if parts of that was like having me under 3 days of observation, absolutely, absolutely. There's no way they would have experienced something like this before. I hadn't experienced something like this before. And again, not mental illness, extreme mental health problems, extreme like I need friends in my house. I don't just need me in my house with like memories of my friends. Like this house is as dangerous as being in Seattle in some ways. So we've gone way, 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 way too long, but with full honesty throughout, I made the slide of lessons learned, and this is for future Thomas. I'll like do this like for myself. This is future Thomas, and this was written around where we at. This would be 222:04:01 around like 1 p.m. PST. We're in standard time now, not daylight. No, we're in daylight time. I think it's this. Let's just, the reality is it's a mess. Lessons learned. Thomas knows some of his own triggers and biometrics to watch for these events. But that's not enough. It's not enough if no one else is watching, and if part of my response to relax is to check out, but not have paths that people like. I need a burner phone that lets like the two friends who need to call me like get to me without me just seeing like a rush of like sympathy, sympathy, sympathy. Like hundreds of people are reaching out, and I really just wanted a channel for one or two, and that's where I was engaging by getting back on email in a controlled way, but not in a call and response kind of way. It wasn't really a dialogue. I had some of that in chats on the Twitter storm day, but after that day, I didn't. I had disabled my phone so much I couldn't send text messages through it. At the time, I had locked myself out. It was even one of the weird stories. I was going to take a lift over to the address in Burlingame as before I decided to break into my house, but I didn't have a mask with me, and so because I didn't have a mask with me, and again I accept the constraint, I should not be unmasked in a lift right now. Didn't want to sacrifice someone else, so I'll only sort of take constraints onto myself. Like there are lots of times I really, really, really probably know I should ask for help, and I didn't. Like there are things far less than a megalixir I could use. Maybe a single healing potion. It's okay to use a healing potion, Thomas, as some form of this answer. If anything comes through in like some of my written emails or my tweets or anything else I was talking about, even the puzzles that I was half building, I may sound a little different when I'm in a hypomanic or manic mode, but I'm still pretty coherent. I can do a ton of self-editing. I come from a lot of depth of knowledge or understanding in certain areas that's probably in those areas more than you have. So I will sound like a level 2 or a level 4 person in any of those things. And I think that's been why people who know me have always had a hard time speaking up and saying, Thomas, are you okay? Like that's not a common question for anyone to ask me, but in part because I know the challenge of my personality to deal with, and sometimes like that I even like view like wearing a tie to work on a Friday as a way to relax. Like that's not how society thinks. So a thing you all should know is I am seeking additional treatment. Starting next week, I'm going to have 3-day a week counseling to go on top of those drugs and other things we had at the start. I want to get off needing medication, but I'm not going to just sort of quit cold turkey, to at least know that I can stabilize back from what was a pretty extreme manic episode that had elements of psychosis or anything else potentially around it. I'm not making my own diagnosis here. I was committed for 3 days. I think there's a lot of interest to tell the story after March 17th, so I really don't want to ever come back to these 4 days again. I think this video is entertaining / frightening enough to sort of pause for now. But the forms of mental health and mental illness I was experiencing in the Mills Peninsula Health Center, around others, connections I made there, even my experience the next few weeks going through different outpatient counseling and training. I think this is therapy. This is helpful stuff for how we start to open up about mental health and mental illness. It's not just about like it's okay to have like the absence of hair if you're male or female. It's not like an issue of disease. Like mental health is not a disease, but if we can't get help for it when it's poor, if we don't know how to even be helpful of others who are struggling with their mental health, and that's where a whole set of the forms of ways people were reaching out to me and why I didn't want to hear them were more about me now having an action item to make you feel better about yourself as opposed to you doing anything to help me. Like sympathy, not empathy is bad. If it would be even better to ask someone else you feel is in a closer circle of trust in my network, like if where I want that burner phone of 3 people, if you're concerned about me, some really good way of doing that is connect to those 3 people, and you may not know if that's like someone in my family, you may not know if it's a coworker. Like if you're not sure who's in the network, ask people who are also around. Like, have you reached out to Thomas? Do you know who he'd like? My network knows my network, and even my puzzle father, who wasn't reaching out, like everyone else was, and reaching out to him as well. So um, I hope this recorded, even if it stopped in the middle, I'd release whatever was there. I mean, this is not an April Fool's Day prank, but it's the next sort of stage of telling the story of what I went through, certainly through that week of March 13th through the 20th, at least up to the time of my hospitalization, but also in general things that I think about when I think about mental health, things I think about when I think about how we communicate as a society, things I think about as I struggle with religion and belief in God and all these other parts of life that are, even for a scientist, parts of a scientific life in different ways. I know anyone who listened to this point is someone who loves me, and I respect you for the time you gave. And I think that's all I can share now is that this last week was not one of full disconnection. It was getting that love, the love I needed, the empathy I needed back at me, spending extra time with my friend who's now landed in Boston, and seeing his daughter and their wife, and just having far too much food given given to me and all these other things. So I'm through my support phase. I think the counseling, other things I'm getting are working for me now, but this is the time for us to turn together, to work as a group to push up that boulder and see if we can actually be more helpful for others who may have challenges either in their mental health or in their mental illness. So I'll call it there, but again, thanks for your attention and love.